being on the spectrum impacts people. Yes, I have social skills deficits, but I also have other challenges such as sensory issues, motor control issues, and issues with executive functioning. I might as well start by discussing my social skills deficits, since that is a hallmark of autism spectrum disorder. I would like to clarify that as someone on the higher end of the spectrum, my issues are with verbal communication, nonverbal communication, not speech and language. As you can see, I have normal speech abilities and never experienced any delays or challenges in speaking. Likewise, I have very strong language skills. I love to read, and English was my best subject in school. My challenges in communicating largely come from not always knowing the right thing to say, and from not always being able to comprehend what other people are saying to me. People can have a very hard time with that second part. It is entirely possible for someone to say something to me in perfect normal English and for me to not understand it. The problem is twofold: trouble reading nonverbal cues such as voice, face, and body language, and being very black and white and unable to read between the lines. It is common for me to think someone is mad when they are not, or to not realize I'm being asked to do something because it wasn't said to me directly. If you want me to sweep the floor, say, "Emily, sweep the floor." I need you to be very direct with me, and some people have a very hard time with that. It can be a very big problem in work environments. When it comes to being unable to read nonverbal cues, I need people to be patient with me when I ask for clarification or misunderstand. I mentioned not always knowing the right thing to say. When I was younger, I had no problem calling someone fat or bald. To me, it was just a fact. Over the years, I have learned there are many things I can and can't say, mostly through rote memorization. I often don't understand social rules, but I know they are important, so I try to file things away in my brain so I don't do the same things in the future. Sometimes I do know what to say, but my tone of voice is so off that it ends up coming across totally wrong. You'd be surprised how many different ways the same words can be interpreted. As I've gotten older, I've learned to do some things such as small talk. However, more in-depth conversation is still a challenge. I've learned tricks such as sticking to the other person's topic of conversation, or only bringing up very generic subjects such as the weather. I've learned not to launch into one-sided monologues about my special interest. I feel like I'm at a place now where someone could spend a few minutes with me and not know that I'm on the spectrum. People with experience do tend to pick up on it, though. More intensely social things, such as friendship, will remain a lifelong challenge, in part because of the deficits mentioned above, and partly because of something called theory of mind. Theory of mind is the ability to understand that other people have different beliefs and perspectives than you. This ability is underdeveloped in me. I think I have driven away friends in the past because I couldn't accept differences, such as spending habits that are jarringly different from my own. I would natter on and try to fix the problem I perceived. I am learning how to put myself in other people's shoes and think how I would feel if something was done to me, such as someone telling me how to spend my money. Sensory issues are another huge component of autism. The biggest sensory challenges that I have are loud noises and textures. My sense of hearing is oversensitive. I watch TV with the volume so low that everyone asks me how I can hear it. It is hard for people to understand that sensory overstimulation can lead to mental fatigue. I can only tolerate being in a loud environment for so long before I feel my anxiety rising and I need to leave, even with earplugs in. In fact, I carry earplugs everywhere I go just in case I end up somewhere noisy. I know I look weird with earplugs in, but sometimes needs must. I also mentioned textures as being a challenge for me. I will not touch certain materials such as velour, velvet, or corduroy. I would go as far as to describe those textures as revolting. The biggest way my texture aversions affect me are clothing and, oddly, public transit. I suppose clothing is pretty self-explanatory. Obviously, I will never wear clothing made out of the materials mentioned above, but I must feel all clothing before I try it on. I can never buy clothing online. I also have to cut all the tags out of my clothing. When I mentioned public transit, I was referring to the texture of the seats. Both TTC and York Region Transit have cloth seats that I cannot tolerate. In the summer, I have to wear shorts that go below my knees, and when I was younger, I used to carry around a pillowcase to sit on. I would like people to understand that touch sensitivity also includes being touched. When someone touches me, I can still feel it 5 minutes later. Touch issues are behind why my hair is so long and why I don't wear makeup. While hearing and touch may be my biggest issues, all of my senses are affected. My mother calls me a German Shepherd because I always smell things that no one else notices. I'm also a very picky eater. I find that many things taste too strong or have weird textures. I will never understand how so many people drink coffee. I can also get visually overstimulated, although it doesn't seem to be as big of an issue. The biggest culprits for that are fluorescent lights and clutter. It is hard for me to be in a cluttered space because my brain sees every single detail and can't filter stuff out easily. I will admit that can be advantageous in work environments that require you to keep track of many things, but there's a fine line between seeing everything and there being so many things that I miss something while processing something else. I would like to move on to undersensitivities, which I don't think many people are aware exist. When I talk about being undersensitive, it means that some of my sense organs receive too little input as opposed to too much. You may think I touched on all 5 senses already, but humans have many other senses, such as heat, cold, pain, and pressure. In my case, the senses that don't get enough input are proprioception and the vestibular sense. Proprioception is the body's ability to know where it is in space. It is the reason you can move body parts without looking at them. You don't have to stare at your feet and think about walking every time you take a step. My proprioceptors do not receive enough stimulation, so my movements can be awkward and uncoordinated. The vestibular sense is responsible for balance. It is named after the vestibular system in the inner ear, which tells you if you are up, down, or sideways. Not receiving enough information from this sense causes me to have poor balance. It's a running joke in my family that I trip over my own feet, and everyone who knows me knows that I'm clumsy. While being oversensitive causes me to avoid certain stimuli, being undersensitive causes me to seek out certain stimuli. I love movement. As a child, I loved spinning on chairs or just standing on a spot spinning. I could never go fast enough on a tire swing at the playground. As an adult, I am a ride freak. I want to be spun, dropped, flipped, and anything else you can think of. This is my way of giving my body the input that it is lacking. Another thing that people don't realize is that autism affects motor control. Fine motor control is small muscle movements of the hand, and gross motor control is the movement of larger muscles or groups of muscles. I have deficits in both fine and gross motor control. I remember being jealous of the other kids because they all had better printing and drawing skills than I did. Even in kindergarten, I would get upset because I was the only one who couldn't color in the lines. Gym was my most hated subject in school because I could never keep up with the other kids. Before I was diagnosed, I never understood how my basketball never got anywhere near the hoop or how my floor hockey stick never touched the puck. I also had trouble with those activities in gym class due to poor spatial awareness. Spatial awareness is knowing where your body is in relation to objects around you and where objects are in relation to one another. So it follows if I don't have a good grasp of where the floor hockey puck is, I would have a hard time hitting it. It's also a factor in both my day-to-day clumsiness and my struggles with abstract math concepts. If I can't fully grasp where physical objects are in relation to one another, then I have no chance with an imaginary triangle in my head. Yet another thing that affected me in those gym classes, and still affects me to this day, is having low muscle tone. Low muscle tone means that my muscles are floppy. The resting state is not as taut as it should be. As a result, I have an abnormal gait and posture. In other words, I sit, stand, walk, and hold my body incorrectly. I'm starting to suffer neck and shoulder pain as a result of 28 years of bad posture, and I also suffer foot pain due to flat feet, which is related to low muscle tone. It is worth mentioning motor planning and motor coordination here. Motor planning is organizing your actions into a sequence to complete a task, such as putting on a shoe. Although I have slow reaction time and poor hand coordination, which are processes involving motor planning, I do not believe I have any major motor planning deficits. However, it is something to be aware of when working with people on the spectrum. Motor coordination is simply performing multiple gross motor functions at the same time, such as bouncing a ball while running. This is likely a deficit that I do have. Probably accounts for some of my issues in my old nemesis gym class. The last area I want to talk about is a group of brain processes called the executive functions. The executive functions are a set of processes that all have to do with controlling yourself and managing your resources to achieve a goal. The executive functions consist of impulse control, flexibility in thinking, emotional control, initiation, working memory, self-monitoring, and planning and organization. I have deficits in almost every single one of those areas, and if you have experience with people on the spectrum, you will notice how prevalent these deficits are. So let's break this down. Impulse control is pretty self-explanatory. For me, it was more of an issue as a child, and is one of the reasons that I believe I was incorrectly diagnosed with ADHD. I used to just shout things out in class. As an adult, it manifests as hating lineups, wanting things instantly, and interrupting people when they speak. The second one, flexibility in thinking, is a huge area of deficit for me. If you tell me that family members A, B, C, and D are coming over for Easter, and only A and B show up, it throws me for a loop. I had it completely set in my mind that it would go one way, and it is extremely hard for me to plan for alternative scenarios. I also have a very hard time with changes in my routine. I was probably the only student who hated supply teachers. Next is emotional control, which means that emotions are allowed to take over rational thoughts when planning and making decisions. Although there were many reasons for my behavioral issues in school, lack of emotional control was a big one. I would be upset and act on some ridiculous thought instead of waiting to calm down and come up with a rational solution. This went as far as me dropping a course in high school. Initiation is having the wherewithal to start a task. In school, this affected me when it came to getting big homework assignments done. I would look at it, not know where or how to start, and freak out. As an adult, this deficit can make me look lazy in the workplace because I may not think to do a task that is obvious to other people. Working memory is my biggest deficit amongst the executive functions. Working memory is the ability to hold a list of tasks or instructions in your head. If you give me a list of 5 things to do, I will probably only remember the first 2 or 3. Things need to be written down, and I need to have visuals to refer to. It can take me much longer than other people to learn a new task, but I'm just as competent once I learn it. This is a hard one for people to understand because I seem so smart, but I can't remember that you asked me to cut a banana 30 seconds ago. It is a big hurdle in the workplace. If you learn one thing from me tonight, please let it be that people on the spectrum need things written down. It helps us so much. Self-monitoring is the ability to compare your behavior to the social norm for the situation you're in. In essence, it's knowing how to behave. Someone with a low ability to self-monitor might pick their nose in the middle of a wedding and not understand when people are upset. This deficit is very prevalent on the spectrum, although I don't feel it's a huge one for me. I do notice that I become more aware of myself when talking to strangers, and then I need a little breather afterward because of the effort. The last executive function is planning and organization, which is exactly what it sounds like. Not only is this not a deficit for me, it's actually a strength. I think that is a great example of how diagnosis can look one way on paper, but look many different ways in people. Now that I've bombarded you with facts and terms, it's time to wrap up. I hope you all learned something about living on the spectrum. My goal with this speech is not to paint a horrible negative picture of autism, but to spread information about the many areas that autism impacts. Thank you very much.